My name's Bruce Pascoe. I'm a Boonwurrung, Tasmanian and Yuin man. I'm living on the very south end of Yuin country here, and I'm very sorry that I can't be with you, but um, I'm having a small operation. The doctor said, but I'm not allowed to lift anything for 10 days, which is fantastic for a farmer. They really enjoy that kind of instruction. But I'm really sorry I can't be there, but uh, what we're talking about is crucially important for our country, and so I'm very pleased that you're all attending today to talk about these things. It seems amazing that in all the years of our education in this country, we never seem to get around to talking about what the explorers and the first settlers actually saw Aboriginal people doing, which was growing grain over vast areas of the country and in areas where we don't grow grain today as well, plus tubers, all sorts of other foods as well. But I was interested in the tubers and the grains because they're staple foods. They talk about possession of the country. So for me, it was as political as it was environmental and economic. But now we're into this economic phase where we're going to grow these grains, we're going to turn them into flour, and Australia will clamour for them because they're so beautifully tasty, make such great bread. But they're also terrific for the environment. And the same with the tubers. The tubers are great food for diabetics because the sugar in them is a fructans. They're just going to be the sort of food that the hipsters are going to pay a fortune for down at the corner store and congratulate themselves and brag to their mates that they were the first to use panicum flour for their bread and all that sort of stuff. That's fine because those people are going to drive it. And we need to respect the fact that it's the foodies who are going to turn to these things first. Then later on, they'll be on supermarket shelves. But the hardest thing, the absolute hardest thing to do, and this is really one of my most important wishes, is that when we do this work, we remember where they came from. These are Aboriginal domesticates. The only thing Aboriginal people haven't got now is land. So it's been so hard for government and other agencies to get their head around the fact that we are going to transform agriculture in this country. We need to for the sake of our environment, for the sake of the Mother Earth herself. But we've got to get Aboriginal people involved in this industry. And I find it really distressing how quickly people take up the environmental credentials of these grains, the food properties and the nutrition of these grains and tubers, and almost immediately forget that they're Aboriginal domesticates, that Aboriginal people spent 100,000 years developing these foods, and they're the first to get forgotten. So if someone can teach us to drink water out of a plastic bottle, they'll certainly teach us to eat these beautiful foods. But the hardest thing, it seems, for Australians is to recognise black. And that's what we have to do, because we'll save our economy, we'll save our agriculture, we'll save our land, but we're not going to save our souls if we dispossess Aboriginal people again. We're sick of this having our history washed away by the tide of history rubbish. It's not washed away, it's stolen. It wasn't an accident. It's not like a tsunami. It was theft. And we're in a position, you're in a position, to make sure that that theft doesn't happen a second and third and fourth time, that Australia can reform its moral outlook on the land and the people and still have the food. Just that Aboriginal people for the first time will be included in the economy. The only way for this to work is for Australians to show goodwill. People think I'm crazy even mentioning goodwill in today's world, but that's what I'm relying on. I'm relying on people saying, no, we're going to do this properly this time. We're going to make sure that the people who domesticated these plants are part of the industry and part of the country. The native millet that I've been sowing the last few days is an incredible grain. It's small, and farmers have been inclined in the past to say, well, you know, the yield per acre is not going to be as great. But then you just point out that it's a perennial plant. You don't have to use tractor hours on it until you harvest. It doesn't need any more water than the country can provide. It doesn't need any fertiliser, it needs no pesticide. So your on costs are zero in comparison to wheat, barley, oats, those European plants. It's sequestering carbon. Eventually, an Australian government will pay farmers to put these crops in the ground simply because they sequester carbon and don't create more emissions. The farmer uses less diesel, and the chemical companies are the ones we have to look out for, because they're going to try and convince farmers, like they've been trying to convince us for 150 years, that we need them. We actually don't need them. We need to look after the ground. The ground will then look after us if we care for the ground. We don't need as many chemicals as the chemical companies say we do, because chemicals, superphosphate, the like, they actually destroy the biota in the soil, and if we can restore the biota, the soil will become healthier and look after itself, and the country wants to repair. We just have to give it that chance, stop poisoning it. We have to wean ourselves off the fact that emerald green is not an Australian colour, and that our paddocks in the future are going to be more straw-like, but we won't be spending as much money on them, and we won't be emptying our rivers to artificially keep that colour going. This is Australia. We have to look after her like she's our mother. And if we reformed our attitude to sheep and cattle, and then took the hours of tractor use off the land, our soils would be lighter and sweeter, and more productive. So I think there's a lot of gain to be had from these plants because they want to grow here. We're always going to have some sheep here, but you know, on the hill behind me, we've got enough kangaroos there to replace the sheep easy. They do jump. It's true, kangaroos jump, but it's not impossible. Aboriginal people farm kangaroos, so you just have to change the way you do it. It doesn't depend on half a dozen people. It'll start with half a dozen people, but in the long run it'll just be, you know, run-of-the-mill, standard Australian work, and Aboriginal people will be involved. And when we start selling black duck food flour, it'll be a proud day. Well, I think in 20 years, I think Australian agriculture will be growing more crops with an Aboriginal origin, and therefore with an Australian nutrition need, and they'll be less hungry for water, less hungry for fertility. So to that extent, Australian agriculture will change. We'll probably be cropping on those broken down old sheep paddocks that are no longer any good to anyone. And maybe that's ground that Aboriginal people can recover and restore. But my grandkids will be able to walk into supermarkets or whatever way we sell food in 20 years' time, and I hope it's not the same way. They'll be able to go and buy their food, and there on the shelves will be Aboriginal foods, and they'll be labelled as Aboriginal foods, and people will pick them up, and you know, that awful cultural antipathy toward Aboriginal people that Australia's had in the past won't be there. People will be choosing to buy black, and that'll be a great day. There have been very few people who have actually wanted to put work into this project we're involved in, but Kate Howell is one of them. Kate read Dark Emu and was very enthusiastic about the prospects of how these plants might change our agriculture and our diet, so that we would end up with a really, truly Australian cuisine. And Kate was in a position to do something about it, being a researcher at Melbourne University. So we really appreciated her offer of assistance, and my son and I, Jack Pascoe, we're working with Kate to do the science on these plants. There's a hell of a lot of work to go into the science of growing, preparing, harvesting. You know, there's a technique involved in that we have to perfect. There's the conversion into flour, you know, difficult for kangaroo grass, really easy for panicum, but there's a whole lot of stuff that we have to learn, and Kate is one of those people who's actually rolling up the sleeves and doing something about it, and we really appreciate it. And we hope that more and more Australians will get involved.